I just want to make a few basic points, some of which I've already written in your magazines, or magazine, I should say, Frontline. But the coverage in India, I feel, has been very poor. The television, appalling, my Indian friends tell me, and the print media, not very good. And one can't help, at my age, but compare this coverage to the coverage that took place in this country in 1956, when Israel, Britain, and France attacked Egypt, tried to topple the nationalist government of Gamal Abdel Nasser, and Jawaharlal Nehru, as Prime Minister, came out and gave unconditional support to Egypt, which is more than Pakistan did. Pakistan was at that time supporting the Western powers. And that year alone, it was reported that of the male children born in Cairo and in Egypt as a whole, I think 20% or 30% had named them Jawaharlal, in solidarity with and thanks to India, which had given them so much support. And what we have today, in comparison to that, of course, is a complete farce. A Islamophobic government, elected, has to be said, by a sizable majority, and a media which, if it doesn't support it, with certain obvious exceptions, has been extremely weak. And you know, when I look at what happened this weekend in the rest of the world, 500,000 people marched for Gaza in London. Close to 1 million marched in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, which they're going to bomb soon, if they haven't already done it by now. 500,000, a bit under 500,000 in Washington, D.C., so much so that the security in the White House evacuated the president and all key personnel, and there were snipers placed on the roof. This is outside the White House in Washington, the country which is supporting the war, without whose support, whose arms, whose money, this war couldn't be taking place, and the colonial occupation would be ended. And similar sized demonstrations up and down, a few hundred thousands, all over the world. Nothing in India. At least if it happened in secret, because no reports have yet come through. So maybe they were demonstrating in private, so no one could see them. And you know, I find this appalling. We know what the government of India is, what its politics are, who it supports, who it doesn't support. We know that. We know that Israeli advisors have been in and out of India for the last 20 years or so, giving the government advice on how to combat terrorism, i.e. Kashmir. And so this is all well known, but what has happened to the Indian left? The last time I heard, there were two communist parties, the CPI and the CPM, and a few smaller groups in different. Have they not been able to manage a single demonstration in Delhi, the capital of your country? Not one? It's quite shocking. Well, what are they doing? Becoming NGOs, raising money to survive in the absence of a political offensive against the government? It's a question I hope someone will ask. I mean, today, as we are speaking here, there is a literature festival taking place in Kerala. I don't know whether there's any discussion on the Middle East, on Gaza, on Yemen taking place there. I'd be happy to be surprised on that front. So let's just see what is going on in Gaza now. We are now on the 7th massacre in this century. There was a massacre in Gaza in 2008, a massacre in 2012, in 2014, in 2018, 19, 2021, and we have a massacre going on now, 2023. If you want to watch it live streamed, come to the West or watch it on CNN. They show it every day, more or less, children being killed, though they've cut down now because they're worried at the response of Palestinians being killed. The closing figures given in the International Court of Justice, so-called, by the South African prosecutor prosecuting the case on behalf of Gaza were what? Each day, she reported, 247 Palestinians die. 1 every 6 minutes. 48 mothers die. 2 every hour. 117 children. 5 every day. Each day, 10 children amputated without anesthetic. Now, if this is not a genocidal killing and a genocidal war, then what is? Please tell me, someone. Do they want to compare it to the Holocaust? Well, I mean, the killing there was slower. Someone was telling me only the other day, he said the gas didn't work as well as drones and jet fighters and helicopter gunships. It was slower. So congratulations to the Western world and its civilized values, and to those who mimic these so-called values in the South and in the Third World in general. And that, for me, is the most shocking. I could go on talking about the history of Palestine, but that history is known. It's a colonial history. It's an occupied land. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, some of us were sent by Bertrand Russell and his Peace Foundation to go and take a look at the refugees, and we did, and it was shocking. That's the first time I saw maimed, amputated Palestinian children, sick mothers, primitive medical conditions in 67. Okay, so it's this propaganda war. It all started in October 1987 by Hamas. Is, to be totally blunt with you, propaganda and bullshit. That's what it is. This is just one phase of the struggle being waged by the Palestinians using the methods they have, which we can support or don't support, but that is part of their struggle to win freedom and to gain independence from a colonial occupation which is opposed by the UN. And gradually they want to destroy the entire occupied lands and incorporate them in Israel. Who said this? Netanyahu, the Albert Einstein of Israel. He said it just recently. And in the United Nations, I think the week before the October the 7th attack by the guerrilla fighters of Hamas. That's what he said, showing the map to the United Nations. This is Israel, and it was all the occupied lands. So what should the Palestinians have done? Sit down and done nothing? Why? It's their country. Their lands have been taken. They've been driven off these lands. The people already living in Gaza were mostly refugees who had been driven out in 1948 when the British Empire decided to create Israel in its present form. There were many discussions taking place at the time within the Jewish community. Many said we should we should live here with the Arabs but not create a state. The Arabs aren't objecting to that. It was when the functions of a state began to be exercised that you had the beginning of a real Palestinian opposition to all this. And now the question we have to ask is, how long can this go on? And I will give you a very blunt answer. It will go on as long as the United States wants it to, or as long as the United States refuses to do anything. Without the United States, this war would not be happening. And, there are previous examples of this. In 1957, when the Israelis marched after being driven out of Egypt, they marched into Gaza and occupied it for 4 months. The American President Eisenhower sent a message, first privately and then publicly. And in private, he said, get out of that Gaza, it doesn't belong to you. And in public, he said, unless you withdraw your troops rapidly from Gaza, the United States will first impose sanctions and then take firmer action. Now, can you imagine these jokers in the White House over the last 20 years saying anything like that? They're completely in hock to Israel. Some people have argued, the US academics and professors like Professor Stephen Walt at Harvard and John Mearsheimer at the University of Chicago, that the Israel lobby in AIPAC constitute an undemocratic excrescence on the body politic of the United States, that they bribe both political parties and pay them lots of money, which is openly registered. You know, in South Asia, there's a lot of bribery and corruption, as we all know, and it would be useful if it was registered. This is the money we've given this politician. We are the following company. We need money. We need help from these politicians in power or waiting to come into power, and this is how much we're giving them, 10 crores here, 20 crores there, whatever. The Israelis do it. AIPAC, the Israeli organization, they register how much money they are giving these politicians, and the politicians don't admit it. But the key question here is surely the following one. To what extent will the United States defend and carry on defending Israel when to do so, or to continue to do so, is clearly against their own interests? Empire they are, the world's most powerful empire. Economically, they're not in total control, which is why they are making noises against China and threatening China. The Russians, who they are trying to crush as well because of Putin's own idiotic and stupid and reckless mistake. He's played into their hands, but they haven't been able to deal with that, because the figures coming out today from the OECD are that Russia has overtaken Germany economically for the first time ever. Since the advent of capitalism and that sort of system in Russia. So they're failing to crush Putin. The Israelis have failed to defeat Hamas. They claim this is a war against Hamas. Nonsense. And when Netanyahu, the war criminal, is asked, why are you killing children? Are they members of Hamas too? And he says, they're the children of darkness. This is who the civilized Western world is defending in the name of modernity and supposedly civilized values. This is what international laws created by the West after the Second World War, all these institutions, can't act. I mean, the UN doesn't want this war. The Secretary General has issued 2 or 3 very bold statements. The United States has vetoed a ceasefire on 2 different occasions and muddied the waters on the 3rd. So just to ask for a ceasefire to stop the killings of innocents, all civilians, or in the main civilians, the Hamas leadership is safe. Actually, it's in Qatar. That's where it hangs out. And it gave a press conference only yesterday saying the Israelis are not winning the war. So the people they're killing as a punishment, is the Palestinians, who have been described by Israeli government ministers as worse than animals. Animals are better. There was a image of an Israeli soldier, IDF soldier, just yesterday, pointing to some animals, saying, "Look, we don't kill animals. We like animals. These ones." That's how they speak, and this is what is really reported in the West in such form. I mean, one of the things we have to say, and a point which is being made, is that the coverage of the Western media has been pure propaganda. It's very rare to see any Palestinian or any Western person defending the Palestinians on the CNN, on BBC World, on French television and radio. France, in some cases, is the worst. And in Germany, they're totally banned. There was a case a few months ago of a 20-year-old Jewish German boy standing in the middle of Berlin saying, "I am a Jew and I support the Palestinian cause." Immediately roughed up, thrown in a police van and taken to prison. And if the Germans think that this is the way they will make up for the other genocide of the Second World War, of the between 5 and 6 million people that they wiped out, they're wrong. Their people are now remembering all those things again and said, "You said never again," but it's happening again. It's not the same, but it's happening again. And yesterday, the president of Namibia openly and publicly insulted the German ambassador who had come to call on him. And he said, "You've come to warn us against China?" He actually used the words. He said, "Who the hell are you to warn us against anybody? When you occupied Namibia, you had a continuing genocide for 3 years. You killed the Herero people of Namibia. And now you're in my country telling me who I should criticize and not. You should see the image of this ambassador's face." So former genocides created European genocides in Africa. People are now recalling those and saying that the West has no basis to take on this mantle of moral authority. It has no moral authority. We know it. Our leaders sometimes ignore it or remain quiet. And in these times, to remain silent is to become part of the crimes that are taking place. And I say this to many of you who live in India, that the atmosphere in your country, which I have not visited for a long time for obvious reasons, is on many levels poisonous. That's what it is. It's poison you're fed when Muslims are targeted non-stop. It's not on the scale of Gaza, but there are similarities. There are lynchings. So you should be more alert to this in a majoritarian country like India, where the number of minorities, Christian, Muslim, are tiny compared to the big majority which rules the country. Just think about it sometimes. Say, why is this going on? There are some Israelis who are thinking. Last night there was a big demonstration in Tel Aviv, the largest Israeli city, where Netanyahu was heckled by his own people, saying, "We want you out and we want the hostages back." So people can demonstrate in Tel Aviv, but not in Delhi. I mean, surely the two communist parties themselves could put up or find a few thousand people. I'm not saying they should be paid. They shouldn't be karikatecto, as we used to say in the old days. But they should at least be brought out onto the streets to be part of a global movement against the war in Gaza. The other point I wanted to make, of course, is this, that linked to the solidarity that is now coming from many, many different parts of the world. Africa, as we've seen from South Africa, courageous, and Namibia. From Latin America, Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, Chile have broken relations with Israel. But the people who haven't broken relations are who? The Gulf states, Turkey, Egypt. At the very least, with Israel carrying out a genocide against the Palestinian people in a very open way. I mean, they're live streaming genocide into your homes. You are watching it on both Al Jazeera and the Western networks, and you're not moved to at least say to the Israeli ambassador, do you mind leaving? Or at least be even more moderate than that, and say, till you're killing our people, please leave the country. After you finish killing them, come back. If you start killing them again, we'll chuck you out again. But get out now. They don't do it. Why don't they do it? Because the United States more or less runs these countries. They're effectively, I mean, what other Gulf states? They're sort of jumped up petrol stations created by the British Empire. Now everyone worships them because they have lots of money. Oh, let's organize a wedding in the Gulf. Let's go to the Gulf. It's become a tourist place. But you have to recognize how it became that. Who created these tiny ruling groups? And why these groups are not acting. Egypt, which used to be in the forefront of solidarity, and its people still are, is run by an army which has sold its bank accounts and its soul to the United States. And one of the conditions was you don't fight with Israel ever again. So they're watching this. They're standing on the border with Gaza, refusing to allow medicines, food, clothes, because the Israelis are determining how many can come in and out. They don't even have the guts to do that. And so on these fronts, the situation is really bad. I have to say that compared to this, the solidarity movements in parts of the West, mainly Britain, it has to be said, our people have come out here and are very mixed. It's not just Palestinians or Muslims. There aren't that many of them. We've had now 4 big demonstrations with either up to or crossing 500,000 people. And these are figures more or less confirmed by the police. Then this conservative government's Home Secretary started saying these demonstrations should be outlawed. In Britain, they should be outlawed because they are hate marches against the Jews. No one was replying. I was asked by some radio station here. They said, what do you think of the Home Secretary's assertion that these are hate marches? I said, yeah, they are hate marches. We all hate her. And that sort of brought a bit of laughter to people's faces, because everyone believed in it, that she's a loathsome person, and she was finally sacked, but she'd gone that far. She is, of course, together with Rishi Sunak, a great supporter of Prime Minister Modi. As she should be, they should be. It doesn't surprise me at all. So it's a weird assembly that is taking place on a global scale. And I have to say that, often we used to say yes to Jerusalem, but via Cairo. Cairo has now been blocked. And the hopes of the Arab Spring were never that hopeful anyway, in my opinion, but they've gone now. And the army is strongly back in power, backing the United States. So that's what we come back to, who runs the world. And while countries like China, South Africa, India, Brazil have their sovereignty and their independence, by and large, the smaller countries are bullied and run by the United States. It's beginning to break down a bit, and if they were to do something stupid in China, that could implode the US empire, because it'd be such a foolish thing to do, given their own economy is so closely tied to that of the Chinese. But in any event, with the exception of these sovereign states, quite a large part of the world is still under US dominance. And they're trying to use China, smaller countries, to say, help, help, please. But this business has shaken the United States. And the reason it's shaken the United States is because they weren't expecting it. They weren't expecting the response of Hamas. They weren't prepared for the solidarity with Hamas displayed by all Palestinians, whatever their political coloring. Even the Palestinian Authority, which has effectively collaborated with the IDF and the Israelis for many years, has not opened its mouth. Hanan Ashrafi, one of the most valuable people, no longer on the PA leadership for good reasons. She was asked on television many a time to connect. She said, I won't. I condemn the occupation of our country. I condemn the people who've occupied it. I condemn the governments who tolerate it. So cut out all this nonsense that it's been started by X or Y group. We're not interested in that. We just want peace. And in order to get that peace, we want you to stop occupying what you agreed to stop occupying till the Six-Day War. And then you have come and wrecked the West Bank and wrecked Gaza. So that's effectively what's going on. And there's been a tradition in the Arab world of dissent for a long, long time. Its poets have spoken. Its writers have spoken, and for a long time, for centuries and centuries, and that hasn't come to an end. That carries on, and that is our hope, that the Arab masses will wake up. And I want to end so that we can have some questions on particular themes and subjects. And I want to read to you a poem written in the 12th century by a Syrian poet. His name was Abu Lala al-Ma'ari, a very radical poet, not a believer, strictly speaking. And he left this message, which even at that time was a problem, about the leaders and the princes and the kings who ruled the Arab world at that time. Here it is. And just remember, this was written in the 12th century. And where the prince commanded, now the shriek of wind is flying through the court of state. Here, it proclaims, there dwelt a potentate who could not hear the sobbing of the weak. And the weak are sobbing again. They're sobbing in Gaza, they're sobbing on the West Bank, they're sobbing in the Yemen and other parts of the world as well. And if we don't listen to or help those who are sobbing, many people will pay a terrible price. They think they'll get away with it. I don't think they will. Thank you.
We are now open for questions. Please raise your hands and the mic will find you.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable lessons. My question is that, as Franz Fanon stated in his book, Wretched of the Earth, the colonizer used the language of violence to settle in the indigenous, to colonize the indigenous people. And the indigenous people, when the time comes, the indigenous people replied in the same language, which is the violence. So in the Palestine, in the case of Palestine, what do you think? Where is the role of violence and how it is playing? Like for comparing to Indian independence movement, it was non-violence, and now in the Palestine issues, the violence is more embedded in these whole movements. So can you comment on that?
Well, the question of violence is not as black and white as you might think. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi himself was not wedded to non-violence all his life. He was violent when he was in South Africa. He was helping recruit people to the British Army to fight in the First World War, mainly Indians, but not exclusively. He became non-violent when he saw that, from his point of view, it was the only political strategy available, and then it was covered with non-violence became a word that was, became unchallengeable, but people challenged it. I mean, during the occupation of India by the British imperialists, the Congress was split. The main party of independence was split. Subhash Babu said, no, we should fight the English. And of course, he was wrong in the sense that for him, fighting the English meant getting the support from British enemies. Socialists, internationalists wouldn't do that. But all over Asia, in independence movements, with the exception of Vietnam, independence movements sought the help of Japan and Germany to defeat Britain. And often they got it. And in the Middle East, there was a coup in 1942 in Iraq, led by Galani, who got German support. And don't forget, the Germans were on the verge of taking Egypt. I often say this to my Israeli friends. I said, what if Rommel had taken Jerusalem, and what would he have done with all the settlers already gathered there? So it's not the case that nonviolence is forever a good. I mean, Nelson Mandela, who's more or less been made into a saint, didn't believe just in nonviolence. He said these are tactical issues, and he defended the creation of an armed struggle organization by the ANC, now the ruling party in South Africa, when it took up arms against apartheid. He said, this is the only way, and this is the way we'll fight. And that was one reason that the South African whites felt they had to negotiate. And the other reason was, this is also very interesting, that they thought they could go and crush the liberation movement in Angola. The South African apartheid state did, and they sent in the South African army, mainly white, to go and crush the African liberation movement in Angola. And two things happened. One, there was a huge resistance, but secondly, Fidel Castro in Cuba said that most of the slaves that were brought to Cuba by the slave owners were from that region of Portuguese colonies, and so we must create a volunteer army of Cubans to go and fight the South Africans. And without Soviet support, or too much of it, they hired their own planes, they got some from the Soviet Union as it was then, and sent tens of thousands of Cuban soldiers who defeated the white South African army. And when Nelson Mandela was finally released from prison, the first country he visited was Cuba. And he said, I have come to you first, Comrade Fidel, my brother, because it was when you, with lots of black Cuban soldiers, defeated the white armies of South Africa that apartheid felt a real blow. We're not just being crushed, we're being crushed by Cubans, many of whom are black. So all these things get intermingled, and that's my own attitude, that, I'm generally not in favor of violence. But what else are the Palestinians to do? They've tried everything. They capitulated and sold their heart out at Oslo. And the Israelis tricked them and carried on the occupations. Then the Israelis said, we talk to you if you accept a non-violent way of acting. Then Brother Barghouti set up the boycott, divest, and sanctions thing. Totally non-violent, but political, and demanding that people boycott Israel economically. That wasn't acceptable because it was becoming too successful. So they said all the people behind BDS, of which I am a founder member, are anti-Semitic. And I warned them then. I said, you carry on accusing all people opposing Israel of being anti-Semites. The next generation that will come will say, yeah, we are. You want to call us that? We don't care. We have no memory of what happened to you. And that is exactly what is happening now. Young Palestinians, many of them I've spoken to, saying, don't tell us about the Second World War. That is now being weaponized and used against us. And for how long? And the German position on Palestine today doesn't help reduce anti-Semitism. On the contrary, the Israel assault on Gaza is increasing anti-Semitism every day in different parts of the world. So that's the situation. And so they've been forced to go back to violence. Why? Because the Saudi Arabians are about to recognize Israel. There's going to be some change. The Israelis were threatening to hit Iran and expand the war. Clearly, someone took the decision within the Hamas leadership. This is what has to be done. And by the way, the information that is coming out, it's not that Hamas didn't kill any civilians, they did, but so did the Israeli army. That information is now out. The hostages, Israeli hostages that have been taken, their parents are saying our own army did that. We know. Their helicopter gunships fired on the dance rock festival that was taking place and killed many of our own people because they didn't want them taken hostages. So it's a messy situation. So just accepting Israeli propaganda is crazy, really, because it's already been exposed virtually every day as lies.
Thank you, Professor Tariq Ali, for that wonderful talk. I'm Faizur Rahman, and I spoke on theopolitics in the afternoon session. So I just want you to throw some light on the fact that Zionism's use of or the exploitation of the Bible to occupy Palestine. They claim that they have a divine right to the land, the divine promise given. So how far does this the policy of use or exploiting the Bible contribute to what's happening in Gaza today? And of course, what's been happening since 19...
Well, you know, yeah.
And
They have been using this argument for some time, but interestingly enough, this argument has been completely destroyed by Israeli historians, Jewish historians, because, as you know, there are many intellectuals, Jewish intellectuals in Israel who are not Zionists and who are Jews, non-religious, non-Zionists, who prefer to tell the truth. And one of these books is by, he was a professor at which university? I think Tel Aviv, I can't remember now. His name is Shlomo Sands. S-H-L-O-M-O, Shlomo, first name Sands, S-A-N-D-S. And he has written a book completely destroying this mythology of the origins of Israel. You know, you have to read it really to get it, but it was a bestseller in Israel in Hebrew. The Hebrew edition was a bestseller because deep down people do not trust the politics or ideology of successive governments. They feel that history too is being weaponized. And, you know, just recently, I think last week, a group of anthropologists and archaeologists came out with a report which said that there's all the evidence under the ground that the DNAs of non-Jews and Jews, i.e. Palestinians and Jews, are very close, but the non-Jews have lived here for much longer, i.e. the Palestinians. So there is no basis for it. The only basis is the Old Testament. Now, people who are deeply religious can use old books of religion, even which are really little more than very exciting adventure stories, and say that this shows that we had this land since X or Y or Z years, going back thousands of years. It's a foolish way to understand history, because the whole history of the world is a history of migration. What the hell is the United States? It's a country of migrants. It's a country built on genociding the native people. And it's a country where there was a very narrow vote as to whether the language to be spoken in the United States should be English or German, because it depended on the migrants from these two European countries. So the largest empire in the world effectively is an empire created by migrants. It has no history otherwise except the history of the native people of the United States. And history is upside down also in India, as you know better than me. I mean, my dear friend Romila Thapar carries on a lonely battle, but she's absolutely right. And, her little monograph on the city which the British claimed was basically won by Mahmud of Ghaznavi, which it was, on a religious basis. That's not true, she shows, with all the documentation and the stuff that has come out. Religion as such, and the different religions in India, in my opinion, were used really in a big way, not by the Mughal Empire, but by the British Empire. They did it especially after the uprising of 1857, where they couldn't tolerate that Muslims and Hindus they had fought together, very few Sikhs, because they defeated them in the Punjab, in previous years. So all these things are often made up, not based on fact, but made up effectively for political reasons. And when these political reasons fail to work anymore, they'll move on to something else.
So, my name is Shivam Sharma. I'm a student of Asian College of Journalism. So, since we are talking this thing from the US perspective, the US presidential elections are approaching. Most probably dates are November of this year. If by any chance the government replaces, if the Republicans come to power again, will there be change in the stance of foreign policy towards Israel and Palestine cause? And if it will it be more radical towards Palestine? Because in 2018, when Trump was the president, they intentionally shifted the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, considering the East Jerusalem being the conflicted area. So, how the upcoming elections of the changes power can change the narratives for Israel and Palestine?
Sorry, I didn't totally understand you. If could you just say it very?
So, if there is a change in power, if Democratic
Where?
US presidential elections in November 2024, which is upcoming, if Republicans come to power, will there
Just
be?
before you go on, if there's you're talking about the elections in the United States?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I understand that. Well, look, I don't think. I think some of the people in the Pentagon will be very worried, because one thing you must understand about the United States, that because of its actual origins lay in either you can call it a civil war among the whites or a war of liberation to get rid of England, whatever way, a revolution as many Americans describe it. One result of this was that from the very beginning, the American army has played a big role in the running of the state. The president, yes, elected, but always there are army people embedded quite openly. They see it as natural. Now, the big thing is this: how long is the Pentagon going to take to realize that this adventure in Gaza that they're supporting and which is now virtually the entire world population is opposing, can last and will last. The alternative to Genocide Joe, as young Americans are calling their president, that's the name. Wherever he goes, there are people, especially young Jewish people, who shout at him, Genocide Joe, you can't hide, we're going to try you for genocide. So this is his standing. And the demonstration was huge 2 days ago. Is Trump going to be any better? I doubt it very much, because Trump is, when you say Trump, you talk money. And his son has already been to Tel Aviv and to, tell Netanyahu, we're with you. So I don't think he's going to change that much. He will on the Ukraine. He said that, even that's exaggerated. But he's saying if I become president, within 48 hours, American support for this crazy government will end. And the Americans are acting on it already now because he's ahead of Biden. It's a great advertisement for democracy, by the way. The characters who'll be fighting the elections in the United States, they're close, in close competition with you guys in India. You can look at each other slyly, but that is what the truth is, except that Modi and Shah are more intelligent from their own point of view than these jokers around Trump. But if Trump and Biden are the choices, nothing will change as a result of the election. It might change if they've gone too far in the Yemen or if they've provoked Iran, which the Israelis are desperate to do in a third conflict. Then there will be trouble, because I don't think the United States rulers are united on this. Some are in favor of taking out Iran, but others know that this has been going to be crazy. It could trigger a third world war, when even the Pakistan army, to my astonishment, declared, when it was looking that this could escalate, declared that if Iran is attacked, Pakistan's nuclear weapons will be used to defend it. I was completely taken aback, because they might believe that, but I think it's largely for show. And the general who's running the country now, my country, Pakistan, had to fly off to Washington, D.C. very quickly after that to explain to the Pentagon what they'd meant. And they must have said, we just had to say it for public consumption, etc., etc. But it's a dangerous situation. And so the sooner this wretched business is brought to an end, the better. And if the Israelis try and hang on to Gaza and occupy it, it's not going to end. They've been trying to do that. That's been their only strategy.
Hello, Tariq. This is Sashi here. Thank you very much for being with us today and winding up this colloquium. I just want to point out that while it's true that in India we have not had the kind of demonstrations one should expect from what happened in Gaza recently, there have been very concentrated demonstrations in some parts. In Kerala, for instance, there have been huge demonstrations. And if you look at the media in Kerala, it is front page news. Gaza it's not tucked away in a foreign affairs page or anything. It's front page news with graphic illustrative pictures and so on. So it very much occupies the public mind in Kerala. There has been a demonstration organized by the left in Delhi, not of the order or the dimension that certainly that this warrants. So I just wanted to say that it's not as hopeless as, well, it could be far better, but not as hopeless as you might think. That's really it. I mean,
Sashi, I'm just trying to encourage more of them to come out. I know there've been these small demonstrations. It's just a push saying, come on out, look at Britain. I mean, we have 500,000 people out on the streets every second week.
Thank you for the articles.
Very nice.
Ram here. Hello.
Hi. Very good to see you.
And your cover piece in Frontline, I think, was a very positive intervention and a very important, timely intervention. Both what you wrote and the fact that Frontline published it, and I think both were equally important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.